Today, I'm reviewing the ZiiGaat Arcanis. This IEM has got 2 dynamic drivers and 5 balanced armatures for a total of 7 drivers per side. How's that for math for you? Let's get it. What's cracking, audio fans? It's David here from Prime Audio Reviews. Now, if you're following the scene, you've probably seen the hype around this IEM of late, and we're going to talk about that today. Find out if it's worth the hype or not. This is the ZiiGaat Arcanis. It's a $399 US IEM. Like I said, 7 drivers per side. The packaging and the accessories is pretty shit. Yeah. There are just 3 pairs of silicone ear tips, a very ordinary little carrying case, and a very generic, rather boring cable that's only available with a 3.5mm single-ended or unbalanced termination. So, yeah, pretty disappointing for a mid-tier priced IEM in terms of accessories. But check out these IEMs now, the shells. They are very sexy. Of course, it helps if you like green. If you don't like green, you're shit out of luck. But I think they look really cool. It's quite a complex pattern on there. A mixture of green hexagons and a bit of silver sparkling glitter. Of course, the shells are resin, 3D printed resin with a glossy black finish. And yeah, everything else is pretty much what you expect. They are somewhat large, just like the ZiiGaat Lush here and a lot of other ZiiGaat IEMs. But despite that, I find them quite comfortable to wear. But let's, all that aside, let's dive into the sound now. And I would say that the Arcanis has a fairly neutral, bright sound signature, slightly lean, yet at the same time, well, I'll get to the bass in a minute. First of all, graph. There it is. You can see an elevated sub bass there, and the bass quickly sort of falls off into a somewhat thinner lower mid-range. But let's come back to the bass. The bass here is rather special because it's an isobaric bass, or well, we have isobaric driver configuration, which basically means 2 subwoofers or 2 bass drivers lined up with each other, both facing the same way, both producing the same frequencies. And what that does, it kind of doubles down on the body and authority of the bass, but without having to raise the level of that bass. So it's not dominating the sound, yet you still get this really authoritative effect. So you've got good depth, good body with a nicely extended sub bass, some satisfying rumble in there. If you look at the graph, it looks like a bit of a bass monster, but in reality, the bass is really kept under tight control. It's quite reserved in terms of quantity. The upper bass is even more reserved. It doesn't have a lot of sort of physicality. What it does have is excellent layering and good texture. So bass heads will likely end up wanting a bit more in terms of sheer quantity. That said, the leaner mid bass does help the mid-range stay nice and clean and free of bleeding, which gives the mid-range more breathing room. It's just kind of a low end that favors clarity over sheer force, which will thrill some listeners, but it won't be for everybody. And then we've got a pretty nice mid-range. It is a slightly lean in the lower mids, but the upper mids and female vocals sound really nice. There is a slight lift in the 2 to 3 kilohertz region, which, you know, brings those vocals in mid-range instruments a bit forward. It gives them a bit of extra clarity, but it doesn't really tip into shoutiness. It does border on it if you turn the volume up. That's sort of the upper mid-range or the lower treble area can get a little bit edgy if you do like to listen to your music up loud. But what's really impressive about the mid-range is just the sheer level of instrument separation. It's like a exploded 3D diagram, you know, where you can where all the elements are pulled apart from each other. So really good imaging, spatial cues, and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, it's a pretty nice mid-range timbre and good quality overall. And then in the treble, well, the treble's crisp, it's got good extension, the highs do reach pretty impressively far up the scale, and the treble sits fairly forward in the mix. There is a dip around 6 kilohertz, and that tames quite a bit of micro detail energy, which keeps the treble nice and smooth. But yeah, the detail retrieval is not great. So you'll hear cymbals and vocal sibilants come through nice and clean and detailed, but the treble doesn't really have that sort of sparkle or shimmer as you might expect. Now, most high notes are smooth and controlled. There isn't really any particular bite or harshness there. But having said that, some cymbal crashes or very high tones can sound a little thin or a little lean. And again, at normal listening levels, the treble feels fairly relaxed rather than piercing. But if you turn up the volume, that forwardness of the treble, that crisp nature, can be a bit fatiguing over time. I'd say overall the Arcanis' treble is clear and airy. It does trade some sparkle and extra air for a slightly more laid back and smoother character, but at the expense of detail retrieval. And then finally, soundstage and technicalities. You've got good soundstage width and a respectable sense of depth. Where the Arcanis really shines, like I said, is in that instrument separation. So it handles complex passages really well. It avoids any smearing or congestion in the mid-range. But any details in that 6 kilohertz range, they often get buried under the upper mid-range, which is, a bit of a disappointment. I mean, if you're going to have a neutral, bright tonality, I'd really like to have above average detail retrieval. I'd say these are possibly even slightly below average in micro detail retrieval, but like I said, the instrument separation is good. The overall resolution is quite impressive too. Alright, comparison time. Let's start with the ZiiGaat Lush. There they are. And the Lush has a little bit more sub-bass presence, a little bit more fullness in the upper bass and the lower mid-range. Now that area where the upper mids transition into the lower treble is a bit more pronounced on the Lush, and that's followed by a dip in the upper treble. So it's kind of opposite to what the Arcanis does. And to my ears, the Lush sounds a little earthier and more natural in the highs, whereas the Arcanis can sometimes come across as slightly brittle. Arcanis has a wider soundstage, and the Lush has a more even and natural sense of space. Detail retrieval is a step up on the Lush, though its mid-range doesn't have quite the same level of separation as the Arcanis does. And next up, we've got the Moondrop Blessing 3. Now, you might be asking, where are the other ZiiGaat comparisons? Well, the Lush is really the only other one I have in any sort of close price range. But anyway, the Blessing 3 definitely has a warmer and a more inviting sound signature. It has more bass quantity, but the bass is less tactile and it doesn't have the same kind of level of layering as the Arcanis' bass. That added bass warmth in the Blessing 3 though carries over into the mid-range, giving the mids more richness, more saturation, but at the expense of instrument separation, so it's not as clean and clear. And the Blessing 3's treble rolls off earlier, which makes it smoother. It gives it a darker overall tonality. However, this also comes at the cost of detail retrieval. One area where the Blessing 3 does rather poorly, in fact, micro detail retrieval is almost not a thing at all. But it makes up for that with sort of this naturalness and laid back approach. So the Blessing 3 has more depth in its soundstage, but less width, and generally a more intimate presentation, like a smaller space. So where are we with the ZiiGaat Arcanis? Look, it is a pretty impressive IM. I like the fact that it does things, it has a tuning that is slightly different from what we're used to seeing. It does have a bit of a wow factor. I think its most impressive quality is the isobaric bass, which is just fantastic, incredible. I would like a little bit more fullness, perhaps in the lower mid-range. It is, look, on a lot of tracks, it sounds fantastic. On some tracks, it sounds a bit meh. So I wouldn't say it's the most versatile all-rounder. I probably wouldn't use it as a daily driver because I live in a very noisy area, and when I go outside, there's a lot of traffic and noise and things going on. So I like to have something that's, you know, really full-bodied and has a forward presentation. But for critical listening, this is pretty impressive indeed. Anyway, I'll leave it up to you to decide. That is the ZiiGaat Arcanis. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, Pa Family Audiophile style. If you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button before you go. We're just about to hit 19k subs. And until next time, I'll see you later.